When you get into this whelmed state, what's at the center of it? You. The only way you can change how you view the world is to change how you view the world. That's where accountability comes in. So we all have stuff coming at us. It doesn't matter who I talk to. There might be different words. If I'm talking to a healthcare organization, it might be patients. Or if it's a corporation, it might be customers. If it's a student population, it's other students. It just depends on who you're talking to. But it's the same thing goes for all of us. We all have stuff coming at us. So that's when accountability comes in. The only way you can change how you view the world is to change how you view the world. And the first part of accountability is to get out your blinders and put it on. Sometimes you just have to get out your blinders and put them on. Now, Dad told me this when I had two co-workers that were always talking about each other. You know, he came down to take me to lunch, and it was about 6 months into my career, and he said, "How's it going?" I said, "It's going pretty well, but..." And he said, "Oh, but..." When you say but, you negate everything you just said in front of it. But what? I said, "Well, I like the people who I'm placing on jobs. I like the customers I'm working with. But the people that I work with in my office, it's really not a good environment." "What's the matter?" Let me paint a picture for you. I worked with Pam and Kathy. All right, and Pam would be a lot like Paris Hilton. She was a lot like, she was always late every morning. She was an incredible salesperson. She was our branch manager. And she would work really hard for about 5 hours. But she was late coming in and hungover, and then she'd be ready to talk about what happy hour she was going to at the end of the day. And Kathy would be a lot like the mom in the 70s show. Kathy was worried about planning for her daughter's wedding. That's what was her entire life, planning for this daughter's wedding. And Kathy didn't like Pam, and Pat didn't like Kathy, and Kathy didn't approve of what Pam was doing, and they would talk about each other. One would leave their office, and she'd talk about her, and she'd talk about her, and I knew when I left the office they were talking about me. Because that's what we did. That's what our office did. We all talked about each other. And I remember telling my dad, "I don't really like that very much. And I don't know if I can stay here." And he said, "Well, if you like your work, you better figure out a way. Just get out your blinders and put them on." I said, "Where'd you come up with that one, Dad?" He said, "Well, I kind of had the same situation with Hank at the market. When Hank started working, all of a sudden I was getting how-comed. How come this, Johnny? How come he got the new set of knives? How come he got off on Saturday, the busiest day? How come he gets paid more? How come? And I said, "How come you're how-coming me? You used to be okay with how much you got paid. You used to be okay with that set of knives you wore them, and you used to like Saturdays. You thought it was the best day to work because it was so fun and busy. How come?" "Well, Hank said where he used to work, and Hank said this, and Hank said that," and I realized Hank was the source behind all the how-coming. So I invited Hank to lunch, of course. I took Hank to lunch, and I told him, "Hank, I am so happy you are here. You're one of the best with a knife I've ever seen. You're a real asset to Bicklemeyer Meat Company, and I want you to be here, don't get me wrong. That said," notice I didn't say but, "that said, Hank, you got to do something for me. I need you to get out your blinders and put them on." "What are you talking about, Johnny?" "A workhorse wears blinders for a reason. I learned this growing up on my farm in Eudora, Kansas. They don't let things go out they shouldn't, and they don't let things that come in that shouldn't. They focus on the destination, where they're headed. Look across the street there. The sign above the meat market says what? Bicklemeyer Meat Company, Johnny's Market. Who's got that name? I do. From now on, Hank, if you have a problem with me, you need to come to me, and only to me, to talk about it. Nowhere else. And if you have a problem with someone else who's at the market, you go talk to them about your problem with them, and only them, no one else. You get out your blinders and put them on, and you can stay here. And I want you to stay here. Like I said, don't get me wrong. I think you are a real asset to Bicklemeyer Meat Company, and I want you here." I think I learned one of the greatest leadership lessons I ever learned by that story, ever. Not only that, but Dad said he walked across the street with Hank. You know how people always think you're talking about him when you're in the office with the boss? They're talking about you, right? They're talking about you. Well, of course, everybody at the meat market was wondering what was going on. Dad was taking Hank to lunch. They walked back in. Dad said, "Hey, everybody, we just had a great meeting, Hank and I. I want him to be here. I really am proud that he's part of the Bicklemeyer Meat Company. And I want to tell you guys, we had a good chat about what we need to do around here. We've been getting off track, talking about things that maybe aren't productive, getting us all up in arms about things that you don't have any control over, what somebody else does. So what we're going to do from now on is everybody get out your blinders and put them on. And if you have a problem with someone, you go to them. Otherwise, you come to me if you have a problem with me. Otherwise, you don't talk about it. Because that's the way we're going to be happy around here. Let's get happy again." Again, greatest leadership lesson I ever learned. Clear the air. Get the elephant out of the room. Best way to do that is to invite the elephant in, sit him down, acknowledge him, and then kick him out. That's exactly what he did with that story. Get out your blinders and put them on. I think for me, the blinders is the hardest one of all. Mine fall off all the time. Well, you know how we're hardwired. What went wrong instead of what went well. You love to talk about people. I buy People magazine. You love to look at that, all that. But my blinders fall off all the time, and at the end of the day, you have to admit your mistakes when that happens. You need to raise your hand, you need to put it down, and you get back to playing the game, Dad would say. Raise your hand, put it down, and get back to playing the game. Whenever your blinders fall off, you admit your mistakes. He said he learned that when my brother Jerry was playing basketball. In those days, in the 60s, late 60s and early 70s, when you had a foul called on you, the ref blew the whistle, and what did you do? Raise your hand, put it down, and you got back to playing the game. Nowadays, what do? Not me. Exactly right. Who, me? Not me. I didn't do it. I watched this with my boys. It didn't serve my oldest son well at high school basketball, I'll tell you that. The ref would be like going, I can't wait to call another foul on you. I know how you react. He had your number. Or worse, you're a turnover waiting to happen. You're worried about playing the blame game and not the game of basketball, and the coach is going to pull you. So at the end of the day, you got to raise your hand, put it down, and get back to playing the game. All right, sometimes you have to know when to let it go. And I know we've just got a couple of minutes. Can we keep going for about 5 more, everybody? Or are we okay? Does anybody have to run? All right, then I've got a few more stories I think you'll like. I want to tell you the over the L story. Sometimes you need to know when to let it go. This is when Dad would say some things are just over the L. So when you're at the point where you don't have any control over a situation, like I didn't have any control over what happened in my corporate career. My CEO was ousted by the board, and all of a sudden the guy that I'd followed for 25 years was now not with the company anymore. I still liked my job, but I didn't like anything that was going on above me. So I invited Dad to lunch at the Blue Moose in Prairie Village, and we bellied up to the bar. And the bartender was waiting on us, and the bartender turns to me, offers me a drink. It's the middle of the day, and I had a glass of wine. And I started whining and whining and whining about work. I didn't like this that was happening upstairs. I didn't like this that was happening upstairs. I'm whining and whining and whining. And Dad said, you don't like anything about work right now, do you? I said, no, not really. Well, no, I like the people who work for me, and I like the work I do, and I like the people I work with. He said, well, then the only thing you don't like is what's going on upstairs? Stuff you don't have any control over? Yeah. And there's nothing good you can say about them? Not really. Well, they're still paying you, aren't they? Yeah, they are. I'd suggest that you figure out the best way to just get over it. Some things are just over the L. You just need to let it go. Over the L? Yeah. In 1951, there was a flood. Down in Kansas City, Kansas, the meat market is down at the bottoms, and they told us all summer long there might be a flood, but all of a sudden the National Guard comes in to evacuate because the levees broke upstream in Leavenworth and Lawrence. It was just a matter of time before we were going to have a flood down in the KCK area, Armourdale district. So I ended up having to go home, drive home. All it took was my best set of knives. And this is when there was only one television set in every home. And I hear the next morning, I wake up and I hear your mother crying. She's out in the front room and she's, John, come quick, it's over the L. And remember, my mom's name was Mary. John, it's over the L. And I walked out to the front room and I looked at the television set, and she was right. It was over the L. What was over the L, Dad? The water. Up the hill from the meat market was a sign on top of the Milgram's grocery store. And that sign said M-I-L-G-R-A-M-S, Milgram's. And the water was over the L on the Milgram's grocery store. So where was the meat market? Underwater. So your mother's crying, it's over the L. And I looked at her and I said, Mary, let's go back to bed. It's over the L. And I looked at him and I said, oh my gosh, that's so gross. Is that why you called Jerry the flood baby? Yuck. Thinking of your parents that way is not a good thing. So here I am thinking, is that why you called Jerry the flood baby? And Dad said, really? The thing that you should think about is the fact that I was going to make the most of the situation. It was over the L. And the minute you realize so many things you worry about are over the L, the happier you're going to be, because some things are just over the L.